everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about how to calculate percents because percents are kind of the underlying basic information we need to know to be able to talk about interest, which is the main idea of our finance unit. So take 3 deep breaths and let's make this math easy. All right, so to start off this lesson about percents, I want to start off by breaking down the word percent because it actually has a significant amount of meaning and it can help you understand how to calculate them. So the root word cent means 100, and these pictures all have that root word related to them because you have 1 cent, which is 100th of a dollar. There's a centurion who was a Roman leader that would lead 100 men in the Roman army. There's centipedes, and actually centipedes don't actually have 100 legs, but they have a lot of legs. And so whoever ended up naming a centipede decided to call it a centipede because centipede means 100 feet. Or a century is 100 years, and a centenarian is someone who has lived for 100 years. So that root word cent means 100. And the root word per means for each. You know, like miles per gallon means that you can go so many miles per gallon or for each gallon. And so the word percent literally means for every 100. And so whenever you're solving a percentage problem, you're basically trying to find an equivalent fraction to your percentage over 100. So for example, if you have 12%, what that means is you have 12 out of 100, or 12 hundredths, which is the reason why you can write it as the decimal 0.12, because this place value is the hundredths place value, and you have 12 hundredths. So when you're converting percents to decimals, you can just move the decimal place over twice to change it into a decimal, because percent means that you're dividing it out of 100. And when you solve percentage problems, you're basically trying to find fractions that are equivalent to this percentage. So let's say, for example, you were trying to find 20% of, I don't know, like 400 or something like that. What you would be looking for is you would say, okay, well, 20% is the fraction 20 out of 100. And I'm trying to find out what part of 400 is equal to 20 out of 100. So essentially, I'm trying to find the equivalent fraction where I'm finding the part that corresponds to the 20 if the whole is 400. And so to solve this, I could say, well, I know that 100 times 4 equals 400. So I could just do 20 times 4 to find out what x is, which would tell me that this would be 80. 20% of 400 would be 80. So that's one way that you can solve percentage problems. And when I was growing up, this was the only way I solved them. But there's also another way that a lot of people will use to solve it. And that is basically to take this set of fractions and multiply both sides by the whole. And you'll say that the part equals whatever your percentage is, written as a decimal, times the whole. So these two equations mean the exact same thing, they're just written a little bit differently. And this second way of writing the equation is useful because this second equation can be phrased as an English sentence that matches up with the way that a lot of percentage problems are asked. And basically what that looks like is you have a part is a certain percent of a whole. So you can kind of think of it anytime you see an English sentence like this, you can write it in an equation form like this second version of the equation. So for example, let's say that we were asked 7 is 20% of what? So 7 is the part, and we're trying to find the whole that it's 20% of. And so if we rewrite this statement and we say, okay, well, 7 equals 20%, so 20 over 100, of means times, and then we're looking for what it's 20% of. Well, you could solve it with fractions, but probably an even easier way to do this would be to write it as a decimal. So I'm going to write it as 0.20 times x. And to find out what x is, I'm just going to divide by 0.20. And that tells me that x equals 35. And if we check to see if this sounds reasonable, we can put this back into the original question and say, is it reasonable that 7 is 20% of 35? And that is reasonable, and so that would be our answer for this percentage problem. And you can use this to solve all sorts of problems. Like you could say, what is 30% of 12? Well, you would be saying x equals 30%, which you could write either as 30 over 100 or as 0.30 times 12. And so to solve it, you would just multiply 0.3 times 12, which in this case would be 3.6. And so 3.6 would be 30% of 12. And you can also use it to find the percentage, because if you say 3 is what percent of 15, well, you just divide both sides by 15, and you would get x equals 0.2, which means that you could also write that as x equals 20%, because that's how you would write it in percentage form. And when you're solving percentage problems, it is possible to have more than 100%. For example, you could have 45 is 150% of 30. And this is reasonable because 150% means you have 150 out of 100. And this is equal to 45 over 30. These two fractions are equivalent to each other. Because 45 is bigger than 30. And so if you have a part that is bigger than the whole, then that means that your percentage is going to be more than 100%. Because 100% is one whole, and if you have something that's bigger than the whole, like an improper fraction like this, then your percentage is also going to be an improper fraction. So I hope this was a helpful review of percents. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in class.